I stepped off that stagecoach into Nebraska Territory on a Tuesday in February 1886, and the first thing I noticed was the absence. No schoolhouse, no children lining up with slates under their arms, no bell tower, nothing that looked like what I'd imagined during 3 days of rattling across plains that stretched so wide I thought the earth had forgotten how to end. I stood there on the wooden walkway outside the general store, holding my trunk handle with one hand and a box of Valentine cards with the other. And I thought, something I'm not proud of. I thought, what have you done, Harriet Monroe? See, back in Philadelphia, I was a school teacher, a good one. I mean, a really good one. I had a classroom with 32 desks and a chalkboard I kept so clean you could see your reflection in it. I had lesson plans written out weeks in advance. I had God. I had certainty. The kind that comes from knowing exactly where you stand every single morning when you wake up. But I also had silence. The kind that settles over a woman when she realizes the men running the school board smile at her suggestions the way you'd smile at a child who says something sweet but useless. I'd been teaching 6 years, and in 6 years, not one proposal I'd made had been adopted. Not one. They'd nod, they'd say very thoughtful, "Miss Monroe," and then they'd do exactly what they'd already decided to do before I opened my mouth. So when I found that notice in the newspaper, "Reliable Cowboy seeks educated woman for partnership and companionship, Nebraska Territory," I didn't think romance. I thought a place where what I can do matters more than what I am. I packed my trunk with books, poetry, arithmetic primers, a Shakespeare collection my father gave me, and I painted 32 Valentine cards, one for each student I'd have in the schoolroom I was certain would be waiting, hand-painted, red hearts with careful script, each one saying something different. You are brave. You are kind. Your words matter. I held one of those cards now, standing in the February wind, and the absurdity of it pressed against my ribs like cold river water. I clutched the card tighter against my coat. Women passing eyed my Eastern dress, my impractical boots, the box of bright red hearts that looked like exactly what they were, hope, painted on paper, carried 3,000 miles into a town that traded in survival, not sentiment. Samuel Briggs was late. Every minute I waited. My confidence peeled back another layer. I should have asked more questions in those letters. Should have asked if there was a school. Should have asked if he could, but no, I'll get to that. Then I heard hooves. A man on horseback, hat pulled low against the wind, riding toward the general store like weather arriving, no announcement, no flourish. He dismounted, tied his horse, and walked toward me with a stride that said everything his face didn't. Long, steady, unhurried. His knuckles were torn and fresh scabbed. He'd been mending fence. I'd learn later. Mending a break his cattle had pushed through that morning. Pulling wire with his bare hands in the February cold while I sat on a bench holding painted hearts. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked at me, looked at my trunk, and reached for the handle without a word. "Miss Monroe." His voice was low, quiet, like he rationed words the way you'd ration water in dry country. "Mr. Briggs." I straightened my spine. "You're late." Something flickered behind his eyes, not offense, just surprise, like he wasn't used to being corrected. "Yes'm," he said. "Cattle got through a fence, had to mend it 'fore I could leave." And that was it. That was our beginning. A woman holding Valentine cards for children who didn't exist, and a man with wire cuts on his hands who mended fences before he met his future. The wagon ride to his homestead took 40 minutes, and Samuel Briggs spoke maybe 12 words during all of them. I tried. Honestly, I asked about the town small, he said. I asked about the winters hard. I asked about the neighbours few. Each answer landed like a fence post driven into frozen ground. done, settled, no elaboration required. But here's what I noticed, and this is the thing that kept me from turning around right then. He talked to his horse. Not just commands, but conversation. Low murmurs I couldn't quite catch, his hand reaching forward to touch the mare's neck when she startled at a snowdrift. He spoke to that animal with more ease than he spoke to me, and somehow that didn't offend me. It told me something. This was a man who communicated just not with words on paper. His hands held the reins like they were born there. Scarred, enormous, the knuckles cracked from cold and work. I looked at my own hands, ink-stained, soft. The nails kept short for writing on chalkboards, and I thought we are two different languages sitting side by side on a wagon bench. The cabin was clean. I'll give him that. Clean and sparse and functional in a way that reminded me of a sentence with no adjectives. Walls, floor, stove, table, bed, behind a curtain, one shelf, and it was empty. No books, no newspapers, no letters pinned to the wall, no almanac, no Bible well, no... There was a Bible, but it sat on that shelf like a decoration, its spine uncracked, its pages stiff. I didn't understand yet. Not fully. I unpacked my things while he carried water from the well. When he came back, I was arranging my Valentine cards on the table, sorting them by message, planning which ones I'd give to which students once I found the schoolroom, once I met the children, once everything I'd imagined became real. "These are beautiful," I said, holding one up. A red heart with gold edges and the words "Be my Valentine" in my best copperplate script. I painted them for the school children. I thought maybe his face changed. Subtle, most people wouldn't have caught it, but I was a teacher. I'd spent 6 years reading the faces of children who didn't want to admit they couldn't follow the lesson. I knew that look, the jaw tightening, the eyes going flat, the careful, deliberate blankness that says I am hiding something, and I am praying you don't see it. Samuel took the card from my hand. He held it gently, so gently, like it was something precious and dangerous at the same time. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it face down on the table and said, "I ought to go check on them cattle." He left. I stood in that quiet cabin holding another card, and the realization crept in slow the way dawn comes in winter. Not all at once, but in degrees. The empty shelf, the uncracked Bible, the letters he'd sent me that I now realized were written in a hand too neat, too practiced someone else's hand. A clerk at the general store, maybe someone who wrote his words for him because Samuel Briggs couldn't read. I set the Valentine card on the empty shelf. It was the first piece of writing that cabin had ever held, and it sat there bright and patient and waiting, like me. I confirmed it the next morning. Not cruelly, I'm not cruel, but I needed to know. "Samuel," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the breakfast table, "I've written a supply list for town. Could you look it over and tell me if I've forgotten anything?" He picked up the paper, held it correctly, right side up, his eyes moving across it the way someone's would if they were reading. But his eyes weren't tracking words. They were performing, doing what he'd watched other people do his whole life without ever being able to do it himself. After a moment, he set the paper down. "Looks fine," he said. "Samuel." Something in my voice, maybe the gentleness, maybe the steadiness, maybe just the fact that I wasn't looking away made him stop pretending. He was quiet for a long time. His jaw worked. His eyes went to the window, then the floor, then his own hands flat on the table. I ain't proud of it." The words came out rough, broken in places. "Henry at the store, he wrote them letters for me. I told him what to say and he put it down. I just couldn't do it myself." He paused, swallowed. "Pa needed me working cattle soon as I could sit a horse. Wasn't no school within 40 miles. Wasn't no time for learning letters. His ears were red. His hands gripped the table edge like he was bracing for a blow. And I understood this was a man who'd carried this secret the way you carry a stone in your boot, every step, every day. Every time someone handed him a piece of paper and he had to pretend, I didn't pity him. I want to be clear about that, because pity would have been the cruelest thing I could offer a man like Samuel Briggs. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and I saw a man who could read weather 2 days out, who knew every one of his 60 cattle by markings and temperament, who navigated by stars and managed accounts in his head and built this cabin with his own hands from timber he felled himself. "You're not illiterate," I said. He blinked. "You're literate in everything that keeps a person alive out here. You just haven't learnt the letters yet. That's a different thing entirely." Something shifted in his shoulders, dropped an inch, like I'd cut a rope he'd been tied with for 30 years. "I'll teach you," I said. "Letters, reading, writing, all of it. But I need you to teach me too. I can't ride, can't rope, can't start a fire that lasts through the night. I can't survive a Nebraska February without your knowledge. So, fair trade, equal exchange, neither of us above the other." He studied my face the way he studied sky, slow, thorough, looking for what was real and what was bluster. "Yes'm," he said finally. "I reckon that's fair." That evening, the first lesson, his hand around a piece of chalk, my hand steadying his. The letter A scratched onto the slate I'd brought from Philadelphia. 2 cups of coffee on the table, steam rising into lamplight, chalk dust floating between us like something holy. He traced the letter 3 times, each time steadier. His face, God, his concentration was so fierce it looked like prayer. I thought, this is what courage looks like, not horses and rope. This, a grown man sitting at a kitchen table, learning to write his own name, and trusting a stranger enough to let her watch him try. The days found their rhythm, the way rivers find their course, not straight, but steady. Mornings belonged to Samuel. He taught me how to saddle the mare without getting kicked, how to read clouds for coming snow. Them flat ones stacked up low, that's 3 hours 'fore it hits, maybe 4. He showed me how to keep a fire burning through the night by banking coals just right, how to check fence lines for breaks, how to move around cattle without spooking them. Honestly, I was terrible. My thighs ached from riding, my hands blistered from rope. I fell off the mare twice in one morning and lay in the frozen dirt looking up at the grey Nebraska sky while the cold seeped through my coat and into my spine. Samuel stood over me, offering his hand, and he didn't laugh, didn't mock, just said, "You're holding the reins too tight. Horse can feel your fear right through the leather. Ease up." He taught the way he did everything quietly, completely, with a patience that made me understand something about myself I hadn't wanted to see. I'd been patient with him at the slate, yes. But part of me, a part I'm not proud of, had felt a little superior. Teacher and student, the one who knows and the one who doesn't. Watching him teach me, that dissolved like sugar in hot water. His knowledge was as deep as mine, just different. And the humility of learning from him, of being the one who stumbled, who had to ask again, it changed something in me. Afternoons, I did what I could, mended clothes, organised the cabin with the schoolteacher's precision labels for the flour jar, the sugar tin, the coffee, a schedule pinned to the wall. Small systems of order that quietly transformed the space from a bachelor's shelter into something that breathed. One afternoon I came inside and stopped in the doorway. Samuel stood at the counter with his back half turned, his rough fingertip tracing the label on the flour jar. His lips were moving. Flour. He didn't know I was watching. I set down the skillet I was carrying and stood very still, my hand on the counter. until the feeling in my chest passed. It didn't pass. Evenings belonged to the slate. Samuel progressed from single letters to words: cat, hat, sun, home. He held the chalk like a branding iron, full grip. Total commitment. When he got a word right, he didn't celebrate, just nodded once, jaw set, and moved to the next one. When he got one wrong, his knuckles went white around the chalk, but he didn't stop. One night I retired to my bed behind the curtain and lay in the dark listening. Through the thin wall, scratch, pause, scratch. He was practicing alone, midnight chalk on slate, steady and relentless as rainfall. I pressed my hand against the wall and held it there. I wrote in my journal, he learns the way he does everything, quietly, completely, without asking for praise. I thought I came here to teach children. Instead, I am learning what it means to be taught that knowledge flows both directions, like water finding level, and the truest lessons are the ones neither person planned to give. The setback came in the third week. I'd given Samuel a passage from one of my books, simple prose, nothing complex, a paragraph about a man building a house. He'd been doing so well. Words were becoming sentences. Sentences were becoming meaning. I'd started allowing myself to feel something close to pride, the kind you feel watching a fire you built from nothing finally catch. He sat at the table, slate pushed aside, the book open before him. He read the first line slowly. Fine. Second line, he stumbled on foundation. Tried again. Stumbled on carpenter. His jaw tightened. Third line, and he hit measurement and just stopped. The silence that followed was not the good kind, not our kind. He stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor like a scream. He paced the cabin 4 steps one way, 4 steps back, his hands in fists, his breathing ragged. This is foolish. His voice was rough, broken. A grown man scratching at letters like a child. I got cattle to manage, fences to mend. I built this cabin with my own 2 hands without reading a single damn word about it. I should have been calm. 6 years of classrooms had given me a teacher's steady voice. But something in his rawness, the way his shame filled that small cabin, broke through my armor too. I know, I said. And then, before I could stop myself, I know what it feels like. He stopped pacing. I stood up from the table, walked to the window. I couldn't say what I was about to say while looking at him, so I said it to the dark glass where my own reflection stared back a woman a long way from home, pressing her fingertips against the cold pane. In Philadelphia, I sat in a room with 12 men who decided what 32 children would learn. I was the only woman. My voice would go up to that ceiling and just disappear like smoke. I turned around. He was standing by the stove, watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between recognition and a thing I didn't have a name for yet. I didn't come west for romance, Samuel. I came because I was drowning in a room full of educated men who could see my credentials but couldn't hear my voice. The cabin was quiet. The lamp flickered. Between us lay the open book and the slate and 2 cups of cold coffee and more truth than either of us had planned on tonight. He sat back down, slowly, picked up the chalk. "Show me again," he said. I did. And this time when my hand covered his to guide the letters, I was trembling. He noticed. I know because his hand steadied beneath mine, this enormous calloused hand that could break horses, holding perfectly still so that mine could stop shaking. I could feel my own words still hanging in the lamp smoke between us, taking up space, waiting to see if he'd let them stay. He let them stay. The gossip arrived the way weather does on the Nebraska plains. You see it coming from a long way off, and there's not a thing you can do to stop it. I went to town for supplies on a Tuesday at the general store. Mrs. Aldrich, the owner's wife, a woman built like a fence post with eyes that missed nothing, handed me my flour and sugar with a smile that had edges. Settling in all right out at the Briggs place. Miss Monroe. Yes, thank you. Must be. She folded a piece of brown paper slowly, precisely, let the silence do its work. Cozy, just the two of you. Another fold. No wedding date set yet, I hear. I felt it then. The old Philadelphia tightening. A woman's choices held up to the light and examined for propriety, for scandal, for whatever story other people needed to tell about her. We have an arrangement, I said carefully. He teaches me the frontier. I teach him. Oh, I'm sure. Her smile didn't change. Folks just worry, is all. A young woman. An unmarried man. People talk. Miss Monroe. That's the way of it out here. Same as back east. Outside, I loaded the wagon with hands that shook not from cold. I overheard a man at the feed store as I passed. That eastern schoolteacher still out at Briggs's place. She'll light out come first thaw. Mark my words. Town don't need no school know-how. Need them children workin', not readin'. I drove the wagon home, gripping the reins the way Samuel taught me, firm but not tight. And I thought about the word home and how I'd just used it without thinking and how that terrified me almost as much as the gossip. Samuel knew. He must have heard his own version men talk at the cattle auction, at the feed store, in those places where women aren't present but their reputations are discussed freely. He came back that evening and ate supper in silence. Not our comfortable silence, the kind that builds walls. He didn't sit at the table for lessons. Went straight to the barn, said he had tack to mend. The slate sat untouched, the chalk dried. 3 evenings this continued. I cooked alone, ate alone. Wrote in my journal alone. The cabin that had begun to feel like partnership, a shared sentence being written by 2 hands, felt like a boarding house room I was renting from a man too polite to ask me to leave. I picked up the slate, ran my thumb across the ghost marks of his last practice, the word home, traced and erased and traced again, over and over, like a prayer he'd been afraid to say out loud. The town took that word from him without knowing what it cost. I packed my trunk on the 4th night, not all the way I want to be honest about that. I packed it, halfway, folded my Philadelphia dress, my spare shirtwaist, my stockings, set my books in neat rows the way I'd packed them before I left, back when leaving was the brave thing and staying would have been the surrender. Then I reached the Valentine cards, 32 of them, hand-painted, red hearts, gold edges, careful script. You are brave. You are kind. Your words matter. Each one made for a child I hadn't met, in a schoolroom that didn't exist, in a future I'd invented out of loneliness and hope and the desperate need to believe that somewhere what I carried inside me would be enough. I held one up to the lamplight. The paint was still bright. The words were still true. And I couldn't tell anymore if they were beautiful or foolish. Maybe both. Maybe that's the same thing when you're a woman alone at the edge of the known world, holding paper hearts in a house that isn't yours. I set the trunk on the floor, open, half packed, half not. The physical shape of my indecision, right there on the rough boards. I opened my journal, wrote the hardest line I've ever written. I have taught him 26 letters and 40 words. He has taught me to ride, to build a fire, to read the sky, but neither of us has learnt the hardest word, stay. Dawn light came grey through the window. I heard Samuel outside, boots on frozen ground, the barn door, the low murmur of his voice speaking to the horses. He hadn't knocked, hadn't asked if I was leaving. I closed the trunk but didn't latch it. Left it open like an answer I hadn't finished writing. I thought I didn't come 3,000 miles to fold at the first sign of wind, but I also didn't come here to be brave. I came here to be useful, And right now, sitting on this floor in the half dark, I don't know if I'm either. I woke before dawn on Sunday, February 9th, with frost on the window. The ice had formed in patterns that looked, and I know this sounds foolish, like letters, jagged, imperfect letters, the kind Samuel made those first nights at the table, the kind that cost everything to form and meant everything once they were there. I lay still for a moment, watching the frost catch the first grey light. Then I got up. I put on my Philadelphia dress, the good one, dark blue wool with ivory buttons, the one I'd worn to school board meetings where my voice disappeared into the ceiling. I buttoned it like armor. Every button a decision, every button a word I was going to say today, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. I picked up the box of Valentine cards. Samuel was hitching the wagon for the Sunday gathering at the church. He looked at me, the dress, the box, the set of my jaw, and something crossed his face. Not confusion, recognition, like he'd seen an animal decide to run and knew better than to stand in its path. "You ready?" he asked. "I am." The church was full. Families packed into wooden pews, children squirming, men in clean shirts. Mrs. Aldrich sat in the second row, her posture a verdict already rendered. I waded through the hymn, through the sermon, Reverend Carver speaking about the virtue of patience, which felt, honestly, like God had a sense of humour. I waded through the announcements of barn raising next month, a missing cow, a reminder about spring planting. Then the pause, that small silence between the last announcement and the closing prayer. I stood up. Every eye turned to me. I felt the weight of it, the skepticism, the curiosity, the judgment. I'd felt it before in Philadelphia, but this time I didn't sit down when the silence suggested I should. "My name is Harriet Monroe," I said. My voice shook. I let it. "I came to Nebraska to teach, and I am going to do that too." I held up a Valentine card, red heart, gold edge, careful script. "Where I come from, these cards aren't just sentiment, they're tools. Each one carries words. And words, reading them, writing them, they open every door a person will ever need opened in this life." I swallowed. "I am opening a school, here, in this church, starting next week. Any child is welcome, and any adult, free of charge, because it is never too late to learn. And it's never shameful to start." Silence. The kind that could go either way. A pew creaked. A child coughed somewhere in the back. I stood in it, the held breath of an entire room, and I felt the genuine possibility that no one would move, that I'd said my piece to a wall of crossed arms and closed faces, and I'd sit back down, and that would be the end of Harriet Monroe's Nebraska experiment. Then a chair scraped in the back row. Samuel stood. He walked forward, this tall, quiet man who hadn't read a word 8 weeks ago, and he took a Valentine card from my box. He looked at it, and then he read it out loud. "Be my Valentine." Slowly, carefully, each word a stone laid in a foundation he was building in front of everyone who'd ever known him as the cowboy who couldn't write his own name. His voice was rough and uneven, and God, it was the bravest sound I'd ever heard. The room understood what that cost him. You could feel it, the shift, the recognition, the held breath releasing. But the climax was mine. I chose to stand first. He chose to stand with me. After the gathering, 3 mothers approached, 2 asked about enrollment, and 1 a woman about my age, hands red from washing. Eyes on the floor asked quietly if the evening lessons were truly open to adults. I touched her hand. "Especially to adults," I said. She looked up, and in her eyes I saw myself, 6 months ago, reading a newspaper notice and thinking maybe there's still time. Valentine's Day, 1886. The church, our schoolroom, now held 8 children at desks made from planks set across barrels. 3 adults sat in the back row, holding slates they pretended were for their children. But I saw the way they gripped the chalk, the way they leaned forward when I wrote a new word on the chalkboard, the way their lips moved, silently practicing, the same way Samuel's had those first nights at the kitchen table. I taught that morning with a joy that felt well, like breathing. After years of speaking into rooms where my voice disappeared, I was finally standing in a room that leaned toward me. 8 small faces, 3 grown ones, all of them hungry not for food, but for the thing I'd carried across 3,000 miles in a trunk full of books and a box of painted hearts. I distributed my Valentine cards, one for each student. The cards I'd painted in Philadelphia. You are brave. You are kind. Your words matter, finally reaching the hands they were always meant for. A girl named Clara held hers to the window light and whispered the words aloud, her finger tracing each letter, and I had to turn away for a moment because some joys are so sharp they cut, and you just have to stand in them and let them. Samuel sat in the front row, not because he needed to, his reading had progressed beyond the basics now, sentences forming under his chalk like furrows in a field. He sat there because he wanted to, because this was the room where he'd read his first word in public, and he wasn't about to pretend that didn't matter. That evening, back at the cabin, lamplit, 2 coffee cups his black, mine with the sugar he'd started buying in town without my asking, the stove ticking with heat. Outside, February wind pushed against the walls, and inside, the air smelled of coffee and cedar and the particular warmth that comes from a room where 2 people have stopped pretending. Samuel reached into his shirt pocket and slid a piece of paper across the table, his handwriting uneven, the letters shaped with effort, some larger than others, the pencil pressed hard in places where his hand had been unsure. 2 words, I am grateful, not I love you, not yet. Maybe not ever in words, some men say those things with fences mended and fires built and midnight chalk practice when they think you're sleeping. But I am grateful, those were the words he chose. The first words he'd ever written entirely alone. And they said everything that needed saying about what we'd built in this small cabin over 8 weeks of lamplight and patience and the quiet revolution of 2 people teaching each other to be more than they were. I held that piece of paper with his uneven letters and cried, not from sadness, God, no. Some things don't need explaining, not even to yourself. I set the paper on the shelf, next to my books, next to the first Valentine card I'd placed there weeks ago, the one he'd set face down when he couldn't read it, now standing upright beside his own words. The shelf that was empty when I arrived now held the beginning of a library and the beginning of a life. Listen. The lamp burned steady that night. The wind pressed against the walls, and the walls held, and I was the woman who came to Nebraska with 32 Valentine cards and found, in the space between the first lesson and the last, that the most important words aren't the ones you already know. They're the ones you're brave enough to learn. I latched my trunk that night, for good.